This episode is brought to you by my 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. If you're listening in real time, new groups are forming in April of 2018. Reserve your spot today by heading over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 187. Welcome to the 187th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I recently created a free 3-part video series all about the fertility awareness method and how you can utilize the fertility awareness method to develop body literacy. So to really connect you with your cycles and really understand what's happening in your body. And so if you haven't had a chance to get your copy of my free video series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to gain access to my 3-part video series all about fertility awareness charting. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. In today's episode, I'm sharing with you another on-air client call. And in today's episode, I'm sharing a call with Karen, who's a member of my current Fertility Awareness Mastery Conception group. So I know you're going to appreciate this episode. We get into a lot of great topics and get into some of the nitty-gritty charting questions and things like that. And we also talk about the importance of preconception planning. So I know you're going to enjoy today's episode. All of my clients have their own medical doctors. Many of my clients are working with functional practitioners such as naturopaths, acupuncturists. And so it's just a reminder that you'll always get the best results when you're working with a qualified health professional. And none of the information shared on the podcast is intended to replace medical advice from a skilled practitioner. Now, if you're listening in real time, the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery is starting in April of 2018. And I want to send you an invitation if you want to join us in the group program. Now, I always separate the groups into 2. And so I have one group specifically geared to women who are actively avoiding pregnancy at the moment. And I have another group geared to women who are actively trying to conceive or planning to conceive in the near future. Now, the fundamental material that we cover in both groups is the same, but of course the focus is different. And it's nice to be grouped with women who are in a similar stage, because then you kind of have a few things in common. And the feedback that I always get from these groups is how valuable it is to actually see what's happening in other women's charts. And it's fascinating, really, to see how women may even be struggling with similar things, but their charts look so different because every woman is so different. So for more information about how to join the program, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to apply. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm excited to be here with Karen. Karen is a member of my most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery group program, and she's in the conception group. As we're recording this, we've had 6 sessions together, so we're kind of right at the midway point. And so I'm really happy to have you here today. Thank you for being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Well, we were kind of talking in the pre-chat. It's kind of funny. So last night we had our 6th session, and you were in the hot seat. So we actually spent a good amount of time going through all of your questions. So we were kind of laughing with each other like, okay, so what are we going to talk about today? But there's always things to talk about. So I'm excited to have you here the day after.
I'm sure we'll find something. Yes.
We always find something to talk about. So before we get into it, I'd love for you just to share a little bit about your own history. So when you started menstruating, what that was like, if you've used hormonal birth control in the past. So kind of take us through any of that. And then what led you to the stage where you were kind of ready to dive into the fertility awareness method a bit more deeply.
Okay, so I first got my period, I think just before I turned 12, and it was never regular, ever. I remember being quite concerned actually in junior high because I kind of started tracking my period just because surprises weren't ever fun. And I remember even then it kind of swung between like 20 and like 40 days. So it was kind of all over the place. And then I got a very serious boyfriend in high school. And so I went on birth control to be responsible. And so I started on the pill when I was about 17. I stuck with it for quite a few years, mostly with the same brand. And then I got to a point probably about 7 years ago when I was about 25, when I just got really frustrated with everything. And I hated the hormones, but there didn't seem to be any options, or at least not that I could find. And so instead, I kind of played around with different like hormonal options. So I did a brief stint of the Mirena IUD, but I found that I just didn't like it. I think just the way I was built, I could feel it all the time. So that only lasted like 6 months, and then that got yanked out. And then I did the ring, but again, I can't remember why I didn't like that. I think I was spotting or something. So that didn't last long. And I ended up on Seasonal for a little bit. One of my friends was on it, and I kind of liked the idea, like, okay, well, if I'm going to be on this, then I don't want to have to deal with my period, or so-called period. So I was on that for about like 9 months. And then I went to refill my prescription at the pharmacy, and the pharmacist told me, like, okay, we can give you this last pack, but you're going to have to go back to your doctor and get a new prescription because they've changed the formula. It's called something different now. And I was like, okay. But then of course I go home and I Googled it and why it was being changed, and totally got freaked out. I guess I didn't realize that the way it kind of like suppresses your monthly bleeding was that it's just at such a high dosage. And I had noticed some other side effects, mostly like weight gain, and my mood had changed a lot. And I didn't really attribute it to the pill at the time because I think it just came on so slowly. But after immediately stopping that, I went back to my original pill. I think I dropped like 15 or 20 pounds within like 3 weeks. So wow. It was pretty significant and very noticeable. So that's kind of what got me thinking about this whole, like, I really don't want to be on hormones type thing. But again, it took me another probably 4 years for me to really stumble upon fertility awareness. And I think I just ended up falling down like a YouTube rabbit hole and found a couple different people talking about, like, you know, different fertility computers that are geared towards avoiding pregnancy. So there was somebody talking about like the Daisy and the Lady Comp. And so I kind of looked into those a bit more, and I ended up getting a Lady Comp because I didn't really trust myself to know what I was doing up front, but I just knew that I really, really, really wanted to stop taking these pills. So I did that and stopped taking the pills in December of 2016, and have just been kind of charting since, mostly charting temperature. But then as I kind of started learning more and more about the method, I knew that I wanted to kind of figure it out for myself. I didn't want to have to rely on something all the time. And then, of course, finding your podcast was very helpful. And the more I thought about it, the more I just was like, you know, I really just want to take some sort of course and actually learn this properly so that I can trust myself going forward. So kind of where we are now.
Yeah, it is quite the journey. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the second interview that I did with Holly Grigg-Spall, the author of Sweetening the Pill.
Yeah.
Or How We Got Hooked on Hormonal Birth Control. Nice title. As a fertility awareness educator, like by nature, we're suspicious of tech. Like, I'll just put it out there.
Yeah. And
so there was part of me, it was like that knee-jerk reaction. I remember she contacted me and she's like, hey, let's set up an interview and talk about the Lady Comp. And I remember thinking, ooh, it's not really like something that I immediately feel really comfortable with. And what she talked about in that interview, the reason why I thought about it is that she said, for a lot of women, who love tech and who are just kind of finding their way through this information, she said, like, this is one of the ways that they can actually be introduced to fertility awareness, the concept of it. And often it leads to this deeper exploration of the body. So as a fertility awareness educator and a woman who's charted her cycles for, 16 years, I think to myself, like, well, this device could prevent you from looking at, like, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying this is what crossed my mind. It's like, this device could prevent you from really knowing your body because you're just relying on the device. But then what she was saying was like, no, it can actually kind of invite you, welcome you into this. And I love that that seems to be what your experience was. It was like baby steps.
Yes, I must say that like after using it for so long, like it's definitely helpful. Like I don't want to discourage anyone if like that's the route they want to take, but I can definitely see there are some times where I don't necessarily agree with what it's telling me, whether it's like a red day or a green day. And I'm sure that obviously has something to do with kind of how funky my cycles have been since coming off of the pill. But at the same time, like it was indicating even like just this cycle that, today should be a safe day when really I'm not actually 3 days past my peak. So it's like, no.
Well, I think it's, there's that, like, that's part of the kind of the difference between, there's nothing that's going to be as meticulous as a human being who's motivated, right?
Right.
And so, but there is validity in it because there is a method of fertility awareness with temperature only.
Yes.
And there are a lot of women who essentially do temperature only and kind of just wait until the 3 high temperatures post ovulation. And that's effective. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of the pre-ovulatory days that are off the table if you're not aware of mucus and all that. But at the same time, like, it's effective. So anyways, I just thought that's really interesting. But yeah, I wouldn't want to discourage anybody, but I think that it's kind of like how I talk about all different types of tech, even how I talk about ovulation predictor kits. I feel like their best and highest application is alongside your own knowledge of your body. Because as you're saying, you're like corroborating the two things. And it's like, well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and especially this cycle, because I get the feeling like if I were to just look at my temperature shift compared to my mucus observations, my shift happened a couple days before the end of my peak mucus. So depending on how you look at it, depending when I actually ovulated, like.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could just touch on, before we get into our session today. So in our session last night, one of the things that came up that was really interesting to me was our conversation about how your cycles have kind of adjusted over time. And so in your case, it's like the best case scenario. It's like my favorite thing, which is that you came off of hormonal contraceptives about a year ago, a little over a year ago, but you came off at a time when you are absolutely not, like, I am not trying to get pregnant. I did not come off of the birth control pill to get pregnant. I came off of the pill to see what my body's doing, but I'm like, your partner and yourself have a totally different time horizon. So maybe you could talk a little bit just about that and your, around your decision of when you decided to come off and kind of how you and your partner are planning for the future.
Yeah, so I think part of my original kind of discovery into FAM was, of course, like those YouTube videos. And then I immediately went out and bought Taking Charge of Your Fertility and read it all and was immediately angry and very interested. But I think a lot of things that really stuck out to me, especially when reading that and even just doing more research on my own, was just how much the pill or just hormonal birth control in general can deplete your body of different nutrients. And I'm very much a planner. I don't like surprises. So like we knew that we would want children in the future. No really like huge rush or anything, but it was at that point where we kind of were really seriously thinking about it. But at the same time, I didn't feel comfortable necessarily jumping into things without making sure that I guess I was okay and at a good spot physically. Because I figure, if I'm able to plan pregnancy and plan all these things, then I want to plan it to the best of my abilities. So I did start seeing a naturopath for a few months last year, and just mainly with the goal to see kind of if there's any supplementation that would be helpful, what kind of nutrients that I needed to kind of really watch or make sure that I was eating more of. So I have been on some supplements in the past year, mostly like iron and, a B complex and calcium, magnesium, and all those other ones. And I did get some blood work done as well through my GP, but it was a bit of a fight. So not as much as I would have wanted, but it did kind of show some of the things that I was kind of worried about. So I guess that was a little bit gratifying. But
Well, and so one of the things doing this type of work, talking about the menstrual cycle and talking about things like planning your family, things that are kind of the closest things to our heart, you really, for me, what I get a sense of, often what I'm doing is connecting women to their kind of their inner knowing. It can sound a little bit hard to kind of quantify, but at the same time, you had a sense, like there was a little voice inside you that was like, I've got a couple questions. Like I don't really feel totally comfortable unless I do these things, and then I'll feel more comfortable. And so it feels like for you, you were just kind of leaning into that inner knowing.
definitely. And I think even just coming off the birth control, there was so many kind of immediate changes that just kind of reinforced all those questions that I was already kind of having about being on hormones. So I guess, yeah, it was nice to get some like confirmation and kind of like a clear path into like how I can actually help myself physically and kind of like mentally on this whole journey. But
Yeah. Well, and from kind of day one of my podcast, one of the messages that I've been sharing and continuing to share and really passionate about sharing is that misconception that when you like the pill doesn't do anything to your body and it's kind of like a pause button and it doesn't have an effect. And then when you get off of it, your cycles are just going to be perfect right away. And that's not supported by the scientific literature. Like it's not supported by my client work. You can see it in the group settings. I mean, it's easier for me because I have all the background knowledge of like how long a person's been off of hormonal birth control, but you can see when a person comes off of birth control that there is a period of time when the cycles are a little bit more erratic. Luteal phase is typically shorter. Signs of low hormones appear the first several months. And over time, with some support, it typically resolves. And also, if there's underlying issues, those show up. So maybe just share what your experience was like, because that was really neat. Because in your situation, it's really neat because we started essentially working together at around the year mark. Like you had already been off of hormonal birth control for a year. And so you went through that transition period and are kind of at the tail end of it now. So hopefully. What was that like? Yes, hopefully. It seems as though things are leveling out now, but share what that was like for you.
So this would be my 13th cycle since I've been off birth control. My first cycle off birth control, I was actually incredibly excited because I was able to see my temperature shift, like confirm that I did ovulate, and I actually had a relatively what they would call a normal length cycle. It was about like 28 or 29 days. And then after that, it kind of got a bit messy. So for the first, I think this would be like my 5th cycle where it looks like it's going to be around the 30-day mark again, which is kind of making me hope that like things are settling down. But in between there, they were kind of swinging anywhere between 25 days and my longest was 57 days. And for a little bit, it was almost going back and forth. So there'd be like a really short cycle and then a very drawn out cycle and then another shorter one and then another like longer one. So it was pretty frustrating, but I was trying to just be patient. And yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, things are settling down now.
I think you mentioned this, but what I have on my notes is that you had your first period around age 11.
Yeah.
And then you started on hormonal birth control, as you mentioned, around age 17.
Yeah.
And so you had about, give or take, like 5-6 years of normal cycling before you went on birth control. Do you remember what your cycles were like before?
They were never regular. They were always all over the place. Like I remember probably like later on, closer to when I was like, 15, 16, 17, I was able to kind of sort of get the feeling that it was coming, but it's not like it was ever kind of like a set schedule, which is kind of what I really wanted. Like I wanted to be able to count this many days and then that would be it. But I remember I would just kind of get just some PMS symptoms and that would kind of be like, okay, like any day now, but that could mean, like today, or that could mean 5 days from now. Like who knows? But
wouldn't it have been helpful if someone had
really
shared with you about cervical mucus, even just that general basic understanding for a teenage girl to know that you get cervical mucus kind of mid-cycle, it's associated with ovulation, and when it dries up, you can anticipate your period about 2 weeks later. Just like that sentence somewhere.
Yeah, because
so
like of course you would notice that like, hey, there's some stuff in my underwear, but what is it? I don't know. So
I didn't even think to ask what it was. I just remember my mom she just like bought some panty liners and then I started using them. And that was the end of that. Or maybe that was the beginning. If only I had known then. So let's go into your charts and into any questions that you have. So are there any topics or questions in particular that you want to make sure that we talk about today?
I think just maybe a little bit about like cervix checking.
Okay.
In general.
Yes, let's talk about the cervix. So you've been checking your cervix a bit. So how has that been going? I can see it on your chart.
It's been interesting. I think part of my issue with like actually checking is kind of how to chart it. Because I know like the Justice app that we're using kind of only has like a high or a low, but my cervix is always kind of low. And I find like it'd be almost helpful if there's like a medium even. Yeah,
I hear that a lot. Yes.
Yeah. But in general, it's been interesting. Like this is really only kind of my second-ish cycle that I've kind of been checking and trying to make more of a consistent habit out of it. I was actually able to kind of tell whether it was kind of closed or open. So that was pretty awesome. But like, I think I've heard you say before, like, if you don't do it every single day, you're so going to miss it. And which is fairly true because I really only noticed one day that it was open, but it's been fairly soft through my whole like fertile window. Is that fairly normal?
Yeah. I mean, you've heard my kind of spiel on the cervix. And so the cervix isn't that exciting, and it doesn't have, there's only a small, like there's only like a day in your cycle where there's any drama.
Right.
And so the challenge with the cervix is it's very literally one of those things that you kind of slog throughout the month. And then when you look back, so because my experience, so even if I look at your previous chart, even though you didn't feel very confident about what you were observing or what you were noting, what I see is that there is a difference between what you saw during your fertile window, right, what you saw immediately after, and then what you saw when you were in your post-op.
Right.
So I am not at your house. I will never see your cervix. But from what I see on your chart, even though, and this is a fairly consistent experience that I just kind of bear witness to, even though it feels like there's nothing going on, it's kind of soft, like, I don't know, is it high, is it low, is it medium? There's still something that's different about how it feels when you're in your fertile window and how it feels post-op. Were you checking your cervix kind of before in the?
Not very regularly. And I think I didn't mark a lot of them down because I just wasn't 100% confident. I kind of felt like it's one of those, like, I don't know what this is yet until there's a change.
Yeah. One of the challenges is that this is part of the reason why. So I'm so old school because I started charting so many years ago. Like, I feel like this is a good opportunity to kind of just, if you can't fit your cervix into the box, then maybe just put a comment in the notes. Right. And then just describe how it feels to you. Because as you mentioned, like when you're using an app, when you're using technology, you're kind of limited by the categories that it provides to you. So if you feel like it's a medium, then you probably just have to write down that it feels medium, it feels kind of soft. And so your own description of it is what's actually more helpful than trying to think of which category does it fit into. Right.
Yeah. And like I have found that I kind of prefer to chart on paper. So I do that. I have my own charts that I've been doing for the past year along with lady comp.
Nice.
But so I do have like a page of notes that I kind of end up transcribing into the app just to make it easier to share. But
Well, if you want to, you have the option to take a picture and share it if you want to. If
I
it
just
works.
feel like there'd be so many things.
Yeah, it's okay.
I want to write everything down.
And I think that's one of the things about the cervix that makes it more confusing. I mean, as far as I can, so there's a couple different parts of it as well. So there's the position, whether it feels low in the vagina, medium or high. There's also the texture, whether it feels soft, firm, or somewhere in the middle. There's the openness, whether you can feel like it's a little bit open, if there's a bit of a dimple, or if it feels closed. And for like, you are not at this stage yet, but when you have a baby, after baby, your cervix changes because a baby has come out of it. And it's never quite the same. Like, so after pregnancy, your cervix is always a little open.
Right.
Like just a little bit. So that dimple that you once felt now it feels different. So then you have to, so even that is a difference. So for a woman who's had children, her cervix is never going to feel like closed, but she would be able to notice a difference between what her cervix feels like post period, like right after her period, as she approaches ovulation, and then post op. Like she'll still feel a difference between what it was before and after. And then
be like relearning it.
yes. But you'll kind of know that, like, well, there is a change that I'm looking for. I just have to figure out what that feels like for me. And then there's the tilt. So we talked about that. So in addition to all of these changes, your cervix is attached to your uterus, and your uterus actually changes position mid-cycle. So then sometimes your cervix might be pointing to the back, or maybe it's pointing to the side or somewhere, but it's, so then those are like, if you kind of think about it dynamically in that way, that typically helps. Because then you're not trying to, so for instance, in taking charge of your fertility, it's like, is it low, closed and firm, or is it high, soft and open? Well, sometimes it's tilted, and sometimes it's, sometimes it doesn't fit neatly into those boxes. So hopefully this is helpful, but I feel like don't worry about the boxes. Don't worry about trying to fit your cervix into any type of category. Just feel it and note whatever, like, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just write down your observations, because once you go through a full chart once or twice, where you kind of, if you intend to master your cervix, once you go through a couple full, like 1 or 2 full cycles where you kind of do it the whole time, then you'll be like, oh, okay.
Right.
So my cervix is kind of like this after my period. It's kind of like this as I approach ovulation. And then after ovulation is the most drama, the shift from opened, high to low, closed, and tilt changes and all that. So then you'll be like, oh. And what I've always found to be most helpful is once you figure that out, then if you're ever trying to make sure, like, triangulate those signs, my lady comp is telling me this, my mucus is telling me this, and my temperature is telling me this, adding the cervix to the mix, once you're able to identify how it feels post-ov, is a helpful confirmation of, okay, yeah, my cervix is, yes, it all lines up now.
Right. Yes, definitely. Something I have noticed in the past couple days is that there seems to be kind of, I'm not sure if you've mentioned this before, if I've just heard it on other podcasts or what, but it just seems like I can feel like a tiny little like bump on like the side of my cervix. And I've kind of done a little bit of Googling, and I don't think it's anything weird, but like, do you have any kind of more information about like what it is?
It's hard. Like it's really hard to know what it could be, because I'm guessing that you haven't been like checking your cervix for like the last 10 years. So no. I'm guessing that you probably wouldn't know if this is something that was just there or if it's something new, right? Like,
yeah, it's pretty noticeable. Like I've only really noticed it the last couple of days. It feels like there's just like a tiny little like seed or grain of sand or something just underneath the surface. Okay. So I've heard that it can just be like a plugged like pore or something, essentially. Like,
yeah.
But
Well, what I can tell you is that, and we've spoken of this, it comes up in every group that I do because it's really common. So if you have, say, like a legit problem with your cervix, like if you have abnormal cervical cells, cervical dysplasia, cervical ectropion, which are common issues with the cervix, then it typically shows up on the chart. And so the way that it often shows up is having observations that are not mucus, but they're wet. So it's not slippery, but it is wet. And so a lot of clients get confused because it's like I haven't wet all the time. I feel like I have mucus every single day. Sometimes they do, but sometimes it's not mucus. Sometimes it's it's kind of like your cervix is healing itself or trying to
right.
figure itself out. And you had a teeny bit of that in your previous chart, just some dampness.
Yeah.
But I don't see anything yet. Like I don't see anything that's super overt. So in general, like if you have something like that and you're concerned about it, even on some level, like it's just a good practice to go get a PAP. When was the last time you had a PAP?
April last year.
Yeah.
And I talked to my doctor when I called in to go see her a few weeks ago about like getting a full exam done. And they actually won't do it anymore just because of the health regulations where I live. The like provincial healthcare will only cover like one full like PAP everything kind of exam once every 365 days. So I have to wait until the end of April.
All right. I'll just swallow my righteous indignation.
Yeah.
Holy
was not
cow.
super happy about that either.
I question everything. I would say like, hey, I have a bump on my cervix. Like, can you just like I'm pretty sure that a doctor can request something if it's warranted, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a difficult patient because when people tell me things, it's like I don't hear it. And I'm like, no, but you don't know who I am? No. Let's get this. Maybe we have I'm Lisa, and I think I need a PAP, so we're gonna get one. It's like, are we gonna get one now, or are we gonna get one next week? Like, we're gonna get a PAP, anyways. So either way, like waiting until it's as we're recording this, it's Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day. It's obviously not coming out on Valentine's Day, but we are recording on Valentine's Day. Waiting until April wouldn't be, as far as like I don't really feel like we have any reason to believe that this is something really serious, or like, because if it was, we would probably we would see other signs.
Yeah.
So I mean, either way, whether you're able to finagle a PAP earlier, oh my goodness, I'm like I'm trying not to take the bait, Karen.
Oh yeah, that whole conversation was all kinds of frustrating.
Trying to like channel that. Anyways, but I think you could either finagle it and be a little bit thorny and make a few people a little bit upset or uncomfortable. Either way, though, you could wait until your anniversary and have one. So just to kind of reel it, like just to be. This is just like us being responsible adults when there's something that we're concerned about, going to the doctor and just doing a test, doing a PAP,
right?
And I ask them to do a bit. Like I'm sure they do it anyways. I would just feel more comfortable saying, could you just do a bit? Like, could you just look at my cervix? Like, do a good visual. Like, do you see anything that looks odd? Have them take the sample. Have them do what they need to do. One of the things that we just touched on, like a touch in our last session, was that you had a couple of days where you had mucus observation that was a little bit yellow and gummy. It was only that one or two times in this chart. And so since you're there and they're all up in your business, you can ask them to do a test for just to, could you just test me? You have to ask for a separate test for STIs. They don't do it. Not just and again, this is just us being responsible adults, just checking all the boxes. And just, could you check me for any bacterial overgrowth or fungal overgrowth, like BV, bacterial vaginosis, or yeast or whatever. So just have them do all the swabs, have them do all the tests, and then you can feel good about it. Like, it's probably nothing, but we've done our due diligence just in case it's something more that we know.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just like the whole peace of mind thing.
Yes. I'm big on peace of mind, because I just feel like it's kind of how I feel about a lot of things, which is like it's no harm in doing a test. We don't really have a reason to believe there's anything really like pressing, but we do have a couple mild things that would make sense for us to check. So having a little bit of dampness throughout the cycle in this chart here.
Yeah.
And so just for the listener, what that means is that like it's essentially a dry day where you're wiping and it feels dry or smooth, but then the tissue is damp and it's not pee. So there's this distinction to be made. And in when you're noticing an observation like that quite regularly, it's an indication that we want to just double check your cervical health.
Yeah, like I think the last few months have given me like a lot more peace of mind in general, just seeing things kind of start to normalize. So I'm just trying to kind of not get all up in my head about it and kind of just wait and see, like, so.
Well, I'll just share with you. I mean, your outlook and the way that you've structured this year and last year, like you're really doing your due diligence. You're literally doing everything in your power so that at the end of the day, like we don't have any control about what's going to happen. Like you don't know what's going to happen when you try to conceive. You don't know if it's going to happen like immediately the first cycle or if it's going to take a couple cycles. You just never know.
Right.
But I feel like there is some value in feeling like, okay, you know what? I did my research. I took care of myself. I did everything I knew how to do to set myself up for the easiest, seamless, healthiest pregnancy that I had the ability to do. And that's great. Like I think that's really important. And my philosophy on that, so it reminds me of, so I'll just share like how I structured my births, both of them. So I had both of my kids at home. Like I birthed them. My son was born in a tub in his bedroom, my eldest, and then my youngest was born in a tub in the kitchen. Different tubs, different types. So my philosophy around that was like, you know what? I'm not really big on surgery. Like I'm scared of needles. I don't want one in my spine. Like I'm just like a sissy. Like I'm just like, but I don't really want this whole situation. So I figured that I can't control what's going to happen. Like I can go into labor at 26 weeks. Like I can't control. And if that happens, I have to go to the hospital. So, right? Like, so I don't have the control over like the outcome, but what I can do is stack the odds in my favor. So I figured that if I could stick myself as far away from the hospital as possible. I mean, there's rules around it. You have to have a low risk birth. There's certain things that have to align. And so again, like you're just kind of, I'm just going to do these things. I'm going to stack the odds in my favor. And then if it happens, it happens. But at least I know like I did what was in my power to do to try to create the outcome that I wanted.
Right.
And then if I went into labor at 35 weeks and I couldn't have the baby at home, then at least you know what I mean? Like it is what it is. That was what was supposed to happen. But in my case, it just ended up that I was able to have them at home. So I feel like it's a similar idea. Like you came off early, you're taking the time to let your cycles normalize. Your cycles are falling into line. As we were going over your charts yesterday, one of the things we were talking about is that, so of course the listeners can't see your charts, but your cycles are following the normal parameters.
Right.
We're having, like, you have menstruation, you have dry days, and then you go into your fertile window. You have several days of mucus leading up to ovulation. Your ovulation lines up with your temperature shift. Yeah. And I can see the changes in your cervical position. And then your luteal phase is robust. So it's 12 days now. Mm-hmm. And there's no spotting before your period. So you've done a lot. I mean, all of the work that you've done with your naturopath, allowing the time over the past year for I'm sure your cycle wouldn't have looked like this in January of last year.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. And that's to be expected. So and so you've kind of done all of the things. And I've had a number of clients who've kind of followed in the same footsteps as what you're doing. And, I'm just going to say, like, many of them are surprised that when they actually get to that stage where they're no longer actively avoiding and they're ready to start their families after they've kind of done this work, doing the nutrient repletion stuff, waiting until the cycles have normalized. And these are, of course, women who have been fortunate to have the time and the ability to do this. Not everybody has the time and the ability to take this time, but are often really like shocked when they try to conceive and like it happens the first time. right? Because you just never
Yeah.
know. Like it
No, that's
doesn't
true.
always happen the first time. And the average is about 4 months
Yeah.
when you have taken like a year off of birth control. If you just
Right.
came off birth control, the average is more like 8 months.
Okay. Yeah. And then
Double.
I've heard like, of course, your age has everything to do with it as well. And so,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and what's interesting is that one of the reasons that fertility kind of starts rapidly declining at the age of 35 is because of the increased risk of miscarriage.
Right.
So if you were to look at a graph, the graph goes, it kind of starts going up at 35, but then it kind of exponentially, like it just kind of like, zoop, like curves right up. So as we get older, even if we're conceiving, we just have like there's a higher risk of miscarriage. So if more of the pregnancies end in miscarriage, then that's part of the reason why it's the fertility rate is a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
And we don't know because we as women, if if I have a miscarriage, it must be my fault. My eggs are old or whatever. Assuming that we are getting older, I'm guessing that if we're partnered and are with a male partner, they are also getting older.
Yeah.
And so it could also be related to the fact that their sperm is older.
Yeah,
Not
definitely.
like old sperm is a weird concept, but the idea of the increased chance of chromosomal abnormality, like all the kind of things that happen as we get older.
Right.
So let me just take a quick peek at your observational routine. I think we went through most of this yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been really on top of it, like in terms of your charting. It looks like you've been like having an easy time remembering. I mean, you're highly motivated to remember all the days since you're actively
I
avoiding.
put a sticky note beside the toilet paper in my bathroom.
That's awesome. Yeah, we talk about all the ways to try to help yourself remember. Has it been fairly straightforward? Like going into this new routine, checking every day, like how has that been for you?
I feel like it's actually come fairly easily. Like the first week or so was kind of like hit or miss because sometimes you just really have to pee. So like you don't think about it. But yeah, like I think sticking that sticky note like in my bathroom, like directly across from the toilet. So as soon as you sit down, it's like right there in your face. My husband's there going, "What does DSL mean?"
All the notations, yeah.
Yeah. So like that's been really helpful, but I think just like the more you remember to do it, it just kind of got really easy. And I was kind of already in the habit of, writing my temperature down every single day and kind of making like a few notes if like something was weird or whatever. So like I felt it wasn't that difficult to kind of just incorporate the cervical mucus checking into that routine as well. So
Yeah.
it wasn't as hard as I was thinking it would be.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that it's easy to take for granted in the group, but there's like a subtle pressure in the group, right? Because
Yes.
like it's like show and tell. Your turn is going to come up, so eventually where's the chart? I mean, it's optional. You don't have to show your chart if you don't want. Like I mean, but it's beneficial for you to kind of participate because then you actually get more out of it. But yeah, I think that's something that it's one of my recent podcast episodes that I aired about strategies to stay consistent. And I was thinking about it a lot. And I thought, you know what, having a group of women where talking about mucus is not weird and and seeing that like kind of everyone else is doing it makes it seem like it's normal, even though in your personal life, I'm guessing that it's less normal and all of your friends don't.
I'm sure some of my
necessarily do this.
friends get some of the TMI.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, did you have any other burning questions or comments or topics that you wanted to chat about today?
Well, I don't know if it's just like me and how I'm built, but I still do have a little bit of trouble kind of identifying what like smooth is. You know what I mean? Like dry is very obvious, lubricative, very obvious. Smooth, I'm just kind of like, I'm guessing it's just somewhere in the middle.
Well, if you wanted to replicate, like to do, because if you were sitting in my basement right now, then I would do this with you, but you're not.
Yeah.
So you're across the country. But so one of the ways you can kind of replicate smooth if you want more of a like literal kind of example. So you take a piece of tissue and then your wrist. And so if you just wipe the tissue on your wrist, like that's dry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you want to replicate lubricative, like you find some lube, put a drop on your wrist, wipe it off, and that's lubricative. So the challenge with smooth is obvious in its own way, but it's obvious almost by by what it's not, like in the opposite.
Right.
So it's like smooth is obvious because it's not dry and it's not lubricative. So if you were to put some lotion on your wrist, not a lot, just like kind of a moderate amount, a little bit, and then you wiped it, that's kind of smooth. Like when I do groups and I ask women how they describe it, they'll say like it's kind of like there's a little bit of resistance as they wipe.
Okay.
But
yeah, and I think that's kind of what I've been doing, you know, like the absence of like dry or lubricatives. I'm calling it smooth.
Yeah, I think that's once you've experienced all three. So you've definitely experienced lubricative, you've definitely experienced dry, and I think once you experience all three, I think that the challenging part, especially when you're in the avoiding pregnancy mindset, is that when you feel smooth, you expect to see mucus, and then when you look at the tissue and there's no mucus, you're like, I'm getting pregnant today. Right? Yeah. So I think the thing to remember, that's the distinction between like vaginal cell slough and mucus, is when it's dry or smooth, but there's really nothing there.
Right.
Yeah. So then, and coincidentally enough, since we're looking at your chart, on the days of smooth, you noted that it's also like it's smooth and it's shiny, but there was no mucus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we've got going on.
Awesome.
All right. Well, just to kind of wrap up our session here today, if for anyone who's listening and was in a similar stage, like in terms of being on hormone, like kind of trying different hormonal contraceptive options and things like that, and is wrestling with that decision of like, when should I come off? When should I stop? What advice or information would you want to give to her?
I think just that it can surprise you how long it might take you to kind of bounce back from that. And so, you know, if you have the time and like you're able to like give yourself that break from it and really just like let your body settle into what it's supposed to be doing and like give everything, like give your hormones time to kind of start back up into like a normal production, like I think it's just been way less stressful knowing that like I do have this time and it's not a big rush, and I'm not necessarily concerned about like, well, what if I can't get pregnant right now? So like, I think it's just been really great. And then also just knowing and like just getting to know your body better, right? Like it's been very surprising kind of how much being not on like artificial hormones has had an effect on my body, and like how long it has taken for things just to settle down. And so I think the earlier the better. And even if you're not like looking to get pregnant, I think it's always just more knowledge is always better. And so this is just a way to get more knowledge about your body and how it works, and like the possible indications of like, you know, this is your fifth vital sign, and like, right, if anything is wrong, it will show up this way. And I just think it's so cool. It's kind of like using your body as your own little science experiment.
Yes, I love it. And do you mind, I just know, because I'm thinking, I always do these interviews and I'm always thinking from the listener's mind, would you mind sharing how old you are, just so the listeners can kind of have a sense of how they would fit into this equation?
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm 32 right now. So I was on birth control for 14 years.
Well, just because it's really different, like we would be having a different conversation if you were 37 or 38, right? Like, it's just different. At 32, at 30, well, I'm guessing then 31 when you went off.
Yeah.
You don't have that, like, your ovaries are screaming you down and like backing you up in a parking lot being like, dude.
Yeah.
They are so loud. I could hear them. There, you know what I mean? But it's a different conversation. So I thought that was a good question to ask, because I'm sure the listeners want to know, like, okay, so where does Karen stand with respect to my own story? Like, would I feel like I had the time if I was her age, type of thing?
Right.
And then there was something, and I lost the other thing that I was going to ask you. I think it is gone.
Oh no.
Well, and so for anyone who's kind of on that, like thinking about whether or not it would be beneficial to join a group like this and actually kind of go the route of an educator, what would you say about your experience?
It's been so helpful, to be honest, probably more so than what I was expecting. Like, I'm a big reader. I'm a total nerd. I like to research all the things. But there's only so much you can get from a book, and it can almost be a little frustrating to kind of read what's in a book and be like, well, that doesn't really match with my experience. Like, is that normal? Is it weird? Like, it can almost cause like more stress, I think, in some instances. So it's just been really helpful to actually talk to somebody who's been educated in this, who has seen so many different things, and also even being part of like the group program and getting to see other ladies' experiences. Like, it's just been very helpful, and kind of just, again, just like more peace of mind, like getting to see like how different everybody is, but it's all still normal. Like, yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that aspect because it's hard to convey that to an individual client sometimes. And also the complexity of it. You can have five women who each have recently come off of hormonal birth control, and you will always have five different charts.
Yes.
And then the amount of time it would take each woman to conceive would be different. The amount of time it would take each woman's cycle to normalize statistically will be similar based on the statistics, but will still literally be quite different for each woman. So yeah, thank you for just sharing your experience with us. I know that this episode is going to be helpful to so many women. I think we kind of underestimate how powerful it can be just to share our own experience and our own story. And so I really appreciate you for being so open and coming on the show and hanging out with us. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/187. That's fertilityfriday.com/187. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Karen. It was so nice to have her on the show. So thanks again, Karen, for coming on the show and sharing your story. What I love the most about doing these group programs is that I get to meet so many amazing women at different stages of their own fertility journey. It's been just transformative for me just to see the impact that learning how to chart your cycles, and beyond learning the kind of nitty-gritty charting, but kind of the empowerment piece of it, where not only do you know how to chart now and how to really understand which days are fertile, which days aren't, but making those connections between your fertility and your health and being able to take that knowledge with you for the rest of your life. I mean, that's what this is all about. So just thrilled to be able to share that experience with as many women as I can. Because I know for me, that was an experience that has clearly transformed my own life. And although I'm here doing this podcast and doing this work with women, in my own personal life, it's been very gratifying just to kind of know what's happening with my own cycle, know how to interpret any changes. I've never had to worry about whether a period is late or not, or wonder what's going on, really, in my entire adult life, because I've been charting. And so I always know what's going on. I know where I'm at in my cycle. I know whether I've ovulated or not. I know whether I'm fertile on that day or not. And I know when my period's coming. And when I was ready to conceive, it's very interesting because although I've been using this method all these years, and I do have 2 children, like 98% of my fertility awareness journey has been using this method for birth control. So ultimately, in my own case, I've been using the method for birth control, and there were like 2 blips where I was trying to conceive and I conceived. But outside of those 2 little periods of time, I've actively been using this method for birth control for 16 years. And so it's just a way of life. And I'm really thrilled and deeply just happy that I can share that with women, that experience. It's really liberating. It's kind of like any of you who are listening who've adopted, who've started using menstrual cups or something. I don't know if any of you use menstrual cups, then you may know that feeling of like walking into the drugstore and walking past the menstrual products aisle and thinking like, I don't need those. I'm good. And it's kind of that way when you don't have to use hormonal birth control, or it's the same type of feeling where you're like, you know what, this is like, I'm good. I don't need your medications. I don't need that extra bill on my healthcare tab or whatever. Like, I'm good. I've got this. I've got it handled. And it's really empowering to know that this is something you can just manage and handle without having to go anywhere or talk to anybody. I don't have to ask, I don't have to get a prescription refilled from a doctor. I don't have to do anything outside of myself. Once I've learned and mastered that knowledge for myself, like I just can just deal with it on my own. And so I feel like in a lot of ways in my life, I've always been like that. I've always been hesitant to start something that I always have to refill, or that I always have to buy more of, or I always have to do something. I've always liked things that are kind of standalone and or evergreen. So whether it's a menstrual cup that's kind of standalone, evergreen, like you buy it once and it lasts for years, or whether it's fertility awareness where you invest the time and the money to learn about it one time, and then you may need a couple follow-ups, but ultimately once you have it, and you have it for the rest of your life. So I'm just thrilled to be able to be a part of that. And I absolutely love sharing this knowledge with women and kind of inviting as many women into the tent as I can, because I know how transformative it can really be. So with that said, if you are ready to jump in to this wonderful world of fertility awareness and really master this whole charting thing, if you're ready to really be confident about which days in your cycle are fertile, which days are not, and to really get a clear understanding of what's happening in your cycle, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to apply. And if you're listening in the future, so if it is no longer March of 2018, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. And there will be information there about the next time I'll be offering the program. So you may just want to get on the waiting list. And so I just want to thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to the show. There are literally thousands of other podcasts that you could be listening to, but you're listening to mine, and I really appreciate it so much. I appreciate all of you for spreading the word. I can see all of you out there sharing the show with your friends. I see lots of sharing on social media, and I've actually come across a couple of blog articles, which is incredible, just, with mentions and shout outs. And so I'm so honored and grateful for all of you for, spreading the word, sharing the show, and just really helping to empower women with this knowledge that we all should have. So one by one woman at a time, we're getting the word out. And of course, that's what this is all about. So thank you so much for being a part of that. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.